I'm going to start off with a little bit of a different tact. I'm going to start off with a question, put you all on the spot. So let me see, maybe with a show of hands, how many people here either have in the past, or maybe you still are, holding a deep, dark secret? I see a couple hands going up, a couple brave hands going up. And I appreciate those that raise their hands and the vulnerability that you've shared. And if you didn't raise your hand, maybe this talk will inspire you in some way. So I stand in front of you as a woman, a spouse, a parent, a child, a sibling, a lot of different things. A naval intelligence officer at one time in my career, a biopharma executive, as you heard. Side note, little known fact, I'm also a bald eagle watcher in the state of Florida. We have a bald eagle nest near where I live, and I watch the eaglet to make sure it thrives and survives and fledges. And the good news is it did this year. And I'm also someone who happens to be transgender. But that's really the least important thing about me, which is why I put it last, because it doesn't define who I am. It's not what I am in any way. It's just not important to me. And that's not really what I'm here to focus on today either. What I really want to focus on and talk to you all about today is grace. And giving yourself grace and extending grace to others. And when we talk about grace, it has a lot of different definitions. It can be used in a lot of different contexts. So for example, if you think about a swan swimming across the water, right? It can be defined as moves with grace across the water, that movement that comes along with it. Other definitions of grace, maybe there's those that live on the financial edge. They buy something, and there's that period of time before they know they have to pay for it, that grace period, right? There's also those of us that grew up and said a prayer before a meal, grace in that context. If you're like me and had a brother and a sister, or maybe you have children, that's usually accompanied by a little bit of pinching or kicking or pushing, hoping your parents aren't going to see you too. There's also grace in a Christian context, right? A Christian context of a divine influence operating within us, giving us strength and regeneration. There's also a context of grace in that it's essentially giving us opportunity to extend courtesy and goodwill in how we show up. And that's what I want to really focus on, is that portion of grace. The nice thing about the word grace is it means so many different things, as you just heard me say, right? But if we step back and we think about grace in totality, there's a common thread there where movement and how we exude in the external space, right? It has this sort of elegance when we think about the word grace. And really what I want to focus on is how do we focus on extending grace to ourselves first and foremost, and then extending grace to those around us. And hopefully in doing so, not only strengthening ourselves, but strengthening the world that we live in. And I think that's becoming increasingly challenging, right? And today's world is becoming much more complex on a daily basis, politically, economically, socially, culturally. Trying to navigate that world is, you think back and you feel old when you think about it, like, oh, back when it used to be so easy, right? But it's a complex world, and there's a lot of things that we don't have control over. But what we do control is ourselves and how we show up in the world and how we decide to present ourselves to the world. And that's the focus of what I want to talk about. And I think as I think back at my life, I think about how I showed up in the world. And I was a young little boy. I was a Little League all-star catcher. In high school, I played football. In college, to pay for my education, I joined Navy ROTC, and I played rugby. After the college, I went into the U.S. Navy, and I was an intelligence officer in an F-18 fighter attack squadron. And squadron I supported flew missions over Bosnia and Iraq. So what you wouldn't know, because from the outside it looked like I lived probably a charmed life, what you wouldn't have known, though, is what I was struggling with on the inside. That little league catcher was secretly sneaking into his mother's closet and trying on her clothes and her shoes and playing with her makeup, and the shame and the embarrassment of, why do I feel that way? What you wouldn't have known is that high school football player going through puberty and struggling with, why isn't my body menstruating? And as crazy as that sounds to say out loud, that's what I was experiencing and feeling, and the shame and the guilt that went along with that. And you wouldn't have known that ROTC student in college, who was the head of their entire Navy ROTC battalion, was going to the library for hours trying to understand resources for, why did I feel broken? Why did my brain feel disconnected from my body? Again, because from the outside, everything looked like I was living this charmed life. Because how I felt inside, I kept secret. I kept the fear, the paralyzation, the embarrassment, the shame that came along with that. So when you're good at keeping secrets, what do? You become a naval intelligence officer. You double down on it, right? You're like, I'm going to be so good at this, I'm going to get the life skills that go along with this. Like, I was responsible for controlling information, who got information, how they got it, when they got it, where they got it, right? So I became really adept at doing that. And that helped me keep myself locked up tight and hidden from the world. So let's fast forward. I always wanted a family. I married my college sweetheart. I always wanted children. We had 3 amazing boys. If you would have known me then, you would have seen me as their Little League coach, their lacrosse coach. My focus, my joy came from my kids, came from my spouse, my family. Probably for many of us, that's where it comes from. Again, if you look at me from the outside, you would have thought, that person lives a charmed life. You wouldn't have known what I was keeping inside. But in 2011, things changed for me. That genie in the bottle, I could no longer keep that genie in the bottle. It comes to a breaking point. And this search for knowledge that I always had culminated with me, again, diving back into the medical journals, trying to understand. I'm in the biopharma field. I went to the literature and learned for the first time that there were actually brain imaging studies that looked at the brains of people who were identified as male, female, and transgender. And I learned that the brains imaged distinctly differently in all 3 of those people. And that was earth-shattering for me. That was mind-blowing. That research has been replicated many times since then. In 2020, it was replicated. There's work in the Journal of Nature. For those that don't know, that's one of the most esteemed medical journals in the world. Flint published a story there in April of 2020. Kurth followed that up in 22 in the Journal of Clinical Medicine with more studies. But that was a watershed moment for me because I no longer felt broken. What I was allowed to do at that time was give myself grace and accept myself for the first time and understand that I wasn't actually broken. This wasn't something inside of me. And at the same time, that also becomes a paradox, a tipping point, right? Because I had to do a lot of praying to come to that self-acceptance piece. Knowing it is one thing, accepting it is another thing. And I didn't want to damage everything that I had in my life. And so I finally made the tough decision to undergo a physical transition from that person before to what you see before you now. Again, that spouse, that parent, that biopharma executive, right? And making that decision meant that I could lose everything that I knew. Everything. My job, my friends, my community around me. But most importantly, what I feared the most, that I would lose my marriage and my children, everything that had been so important to me. And that's exactly what happened with my marriage. And it happens for so many people. But because of grace, I understand that I had to do what was best for me and respect that that's what she had to do for her, that she couldn't accept me. And losing your friends, in my case, I had most of my friends were doctors. And I'm thinking, well, this is easy, right? Doctors should get it. I mean, my friends were like orthopedic surgeons, spine surgeons, podiatrists, OBGYNs. I'm like, well, this is a no-brainer, right? They know. So I came out to them. I haven't heard a word from them since that day I came out to them. And so I remember one night, my youngest son at that time was 9 years old. I was putting him to bed that night. And it was the time that I had going through those periods of loss. And I had been crying a little bit and trying to hide that from him. In his room, we were in his room, his light was off, and he could see that I'd been crying a little bit. And my 9-year-old son put his arms up to me from his bed. And he gave me a hug, and he said, "Dad, don't worry. You're never going to lose me." That 9-year-old extending grace to me at that time, outside of himself, was a turning point in my life. And it was soon after that that my life turned around. I met my now wife. I rebuilt my friends. I rebuilt my community. And I think that it's the thing that I attribute to my survival, and that's the term I use, it's my survival, is the grace that I gave myself and the grace that I've also tried to extend to others in doing so. And I think that is becoming increasingly challenging if we think back to the external environment, that whether you know a lot about people in my situation or you don't, there's a lot going on in the world today telling me that people like me or others are misfits, that we're broken, that there's something, that we're not the people that you see in front of me. And I had been living quietly in North Carolina before, for the first few years of my transition. And then in 2016, they passed what was referred to as the bathroom bill. And maybe not everybody knows what a bathroom bill is, but it means that basically someone like me is supposed to use the bathroom of the gender they were assigned at birth. And I don't fancy myself a supermodel in any stretch of the imagination, but I do hope that if I were walking to a men's room, that people are probably going to be uncomfortable wondering what I'm doing in a men's room. And for me, that was so crushing, so heartbreaking to me. I had climbed this mountain to accept myself and to extend myself grace. But what I worried about is, what about the generations that were going to come after me? Is that going to be opportunity to be taken away from them? Are they going to have to wait to midlife to transition like I did? And that's what spurred me to be more public and working to try and hopefully extend grace to others and break down barriers in hopes that they would understand. And through that work, I came to know so many different people from different backgrounds. And, there's a lot of different people who are marginalized in this world, marginalized for different things, whether it's their ethnicity, their race, their religion, their gender, their socioeconomic status. And people who are marginalized for different reasons, but they share that commonality of being marginalized. And being in North Carolina during that time and feeling the grace of all of these different communities coming together to support my own was earth-shattering to me. All these communities extended grace to me and my community to help stand by us. And I think that, again, it's one of these things that up until that point in my life, before I transitioned, I existed in the world with white male status, something I never, ever in the world knew that I had until it was gone. And then I looked around the world very, very differently. And I could see that so many other people were suffering in ways that I just had no idea about and could not appreciate until I looked at it from that lens. And it really crystallized for me that all of us need allies in this world. All of us need people to help support us. And that none of us, no matter what we're going through, what secrets we have, are ever alone in this world. And should never feel like we're alone in this world. So, as someone who's wakes up every day for the last 8 years wondering about what's the threat to my existence that's going to, come next and where is it going to come from, I think that I know that I can't do it alone, and that we're stronger together than we are apart, and that I have to keep doing what I need to do to extend grace to myself, to extend grace to others, and create an opportunity for people to learn. Because whether it's about my issue or other people's issues, all of these things go back to the root cause. I think the largest root cause, it's not a singular cause, but ignorance and a lack of knowledge. And helping people understand and demystifying things and extending grace to them and making it okay and comfortable for them to reach out and to be approachable. Because every day we have a choice in our lives. There's a lot of things we can't control in the complexity of what's going on around us, but we choose how we're going to show up. We choose whether we're going to extend grace to ourselves or extend grace to others. And no matter what kind of chaos is taking place, nobody can take that away from us. And hopefully in doing so, that can inspire others to change in ways that we have no idea about. And I think that also in doing so can help give people the courage to face whatever secrets they may be holding, whatever may be paralyzing them, whatever may be holding them back in this world, scared to share because they probably think that nobody else out there feels the way that they do. But if you start by giving yourself grace, first and foremost, and then you find it might also help to give grace to others, that we can hopefully make the world a better place. Thank you.